Many people think commentating is pretty easy. I've had bike riders. I've been flying with bike riders said, I'm going to have your job next year. I said, are you? Yeah. He said, I can do that. I said, okay, give it a go. Because when you put people alongside you and say, okay, when that red light comes on, you're live. Go on, talk. They don't know what to do. They know the sport, but they don't know the rest of it. Producer says, give us 10 seconds. He doesn't want 11. He wants 10. Or better, 9.5.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. Phil Liggett. He's undeniably the most recognizable voice in cycling and has brought the sport we all love into the mainstream through his Liggetisms, descriptions of châteaux, and his dulcet tones with co-commentator, the late Paul Sherwen. Many enthusiasts say that Phil is long past his prime and should retire. There's no denying that we're in a new age from when Phil started commentating before many of us were even born, and the media landscape is in a very different place now than it was then. But Phil has witnessed and called so many of cycling's most significant and historic moments and made us all jump out of our chairs with excitement. And you have to thank him for being part of those memories. Phil is now 76 years old and has been commentating since the late 70s. Think about that. His impact on the sport and his pioneering role has been tremendous. These days, while he might get some of the details wrong while calling the race in front of millions of people, I can tell you firsthand through my many interactions with him that he's still sharp as a tack. And while as much as you don't want to hear this, his commentary isn't really for you or me, the hardcore cycling fan. It's for the people who immerse themselves into the Tour de France once a year and they still love him. From starting as an aspiring pro bike racer, to journalist, to commentating with the late Paul Sherwen for 33 years, now in the twilight of his remarkable life and career, I sat down with Phil to hear how he got started and some of his struggles along the way.
So the Tour de France comes down to the climax. It's always threatened it would be. These two men have been Siamese twins throughout the race. Now the cord is broken and it looks like Greg LeMond might, but look at the finish by Fignon. They're all turned off. It's going to be close. 27:47 he must do. The clock is counting down. So are the meters to the line. This is going to be incredible. Fignon is bouncing off the barriers here. He's lost the Tour de France. The crowd has realised it. Laurent Fignon has lost the Tour de France. Laurent Fignon has lost the Tour and Greg LeMond has won it.
Well, my first bike was one just for fun riding. I lived on the Wirral Peninsula, which was a hotbed of cycling, but I didn't know it at the time. And I remember I bought a Rally Lenton with straight handlebars and BSA mudguards. And the BSA mudguards had this lovely badge on the back, and I searched all the bike shops to make sure I got these mudguards on the bike and with the reflector on the back of the fender. So I bought that and I used it purely for fun. It cost, I think, £3.19 and sixpence. I think I probably paid for it over a year or 2 years even, about 1 and sixpence a week in old money. Anyway, I got the bike and I love cycling, but I used it basically just to go to school on. The only 2 times I was ever late for school was a Wednesday, and I used to come home for lunch, and that was when I had to walk to school because there was something wrong with the bike. It's the only time I was ever late in all the years. But I moved on from that to a Freddie Grubb, which I had sent up from London, and a Ted Gerard at the time, just because I liked the name and I liked the look of the bikes in the magazines.
Yeah.
And they came up from London because the Northerners think that you're a traitor, because the North and the South, even to this day, there's always a gap between the Northerners and the Southerners.
Were these more race bikes? Were these more race bikes?
Yes, when after the Rally Lenton, then I had to look for a bike.
Yeah. So
I bought a Ted Gerard and had the frame sent up from London. I built it up on the Wirral. And I was riding my bike, but not very often, and just for fun, usually using it to go fishing, really. And my best mate started riding with a club. It was the Wirral section of the Cyclist Touring Club, as they were called then. They're now called UK Cycling Association, of which at the turn of the millennium I became the president of for 10 years, which I was very proud of. So anyway, I went. I said, "Okay, I'll come out with you." He said, "We have great rides on Sundays." And I said, "What?" I said, "I can't come out on Sundays because it's the only day I get a hot meal, because Mum didn't cook hot meals in the week, and I couldn't miss my Sunday lunch, so I wouldn't go." And he kept coming back and telling me about these trips into Wales, and Wales was only, I don't know, Wales is about 20 miles maximum from our home, and different world, hilly, beautiful countryside. And so he said, "You've got to come." He said, "We stayed at Prestatyn Youth Hostel and Battersea Coed and Llandudno, and told me all about these mountains and stuff and the sea." And in the end, I cracked, and I went with him down to Bebington Station, where we met the Wirral section of the Cyclist Touring Club, and off we went. Of course, the friendship's the number one thing. And we went youth hosteling. I saw Wales. There was no car in our family. And so Mum and Dad, apart from the fact Mum was born in Wales, she was never been back. And I said, "One day I'll buy a car and I'll take you all out in it." So when I was 18, I did buy a car and I did take them out.
Yeah.
But for me, the bike riding, a bit. Hopeless at all school sports. Every sport, name it. In rugby, they threw me into touch. In cricket, I couldn't bowl. In football, the only goal I scored, the goalkeeper had gone home 2 minutes early from school. So I was useless. But on the bike, I was happy as a sandboy. And so I saw these guys training. They looked really super fit and fast, and they wore leather jackets when they weren't racing. They were pros. And so I thought, I want to be one of them. And so I switched clubs because obviously a touring club, although the boys were all strong, they weren't racing. And so I joined a club, started off with the North Wirral Velo, which there was a guy called Keith Boardman riding in that club, and one day he came to the Two Mills Cafe on the Welsh borders and said to me, "Seen the new son, Phil?" I said, "Oh, yeah, well done, Keith and Carol." And he said he'd be an Olympic champion one day. Bloody hell, he was in 1972, the first for 75 years for Great Britain in cycling. It was fabulous. And so Keith's still around, very much so, and still rides his bike. But and Chris Boardman became a star in his own right, as you know. Anyway, so I thought, well, I've got to be a pro, and I got riding with the lads. The North Wirral Velo had a top team in it, semi-pros as well, and I couldn't break into their first team as a kid. I was only second category rider. So I joined the New Brighton Cycling Club, which didn't have the same backing as the North Wirral Velo, but I was in the first team, and I got my first class racing licence, and I was always riding the races I wanted to ride. And then from there, I just joined the Birkenhead North End, which is an even stronger club. On Wirral, we had great boys, great racing kids. And then from there, I went to Belgium. Now, throughout my life, I've had nil ambition to be a television commentator or even a writer, which is how I eventually started out.
Yeah.
But I went to Belgium, and I'd already written, because nobody writes about the local cyclists. In the two newspapers we had locally was the Birkenhead News and the Bebington News. I lived in Bebington, so I wrote an article every week just about the club riders, what they did. Didn't get paid for it, but they gave me good space.
Yeah.
And then I moved over to Belgium to try and be a pro, and we moved into a dingy little place in a street called the Krommenelleboog, which is the bent elbow. It was a dump, but it was all we could afford, and I was living with other good cyclists. We took turns in doing the cooking. We all trained together, all had the same ambition to impress. And we raced. And during that period of racing, Thomas Simpson was the new world champion, which was an incentive. I was racing and living in the area. And so I complained to the cycling magazine of the day, Cycling and Mopeds it was then, that you never write about these guys living in Belgium on their own money, having to win prizes to stay in Belgium, their ambitions, etc. And they said, we can't afford to do that. They said, you do it for us. So on Sunday nights, every Sunday, I sat in the St. Peter's Station, that's P-A-I-E-T-E-R-S, St. Peter's Station in Ghent, and put in a reverse phone call to London, took 90 minutes minimum to come back, and all I wanted to do was go to bed. I've been racing all day. And then I read my story to them, and they printed it, and they paid me, I think, about £20 in those days. I can't remember. And so I did every week. And then because they seemed to like what I was writing, I had no training, of course. They asked me Simpson was riding in certain pro races, would I go along and report the pro race, which I did. And then, I also was racing, and I earned, by the end of the season, the opportunity to turn pro next year, the following year, which would be in 1967. And I would have to come back. So I returned to London. I got a job. I walked into the personnel office of Port Sunlight, which is the town a mile away from where I live. I said, hey, you've got 3 of my uncles work here, and between them, they're giving you 160 years service. Any chance of a temporary job doing anything at all? Manuals, even better. So they put me into the milk section and the catering. So I was humping milk churns and strengthening my back, and I was serving the food to Lord Levy Hume at his banquets and stuff like that.
Was this kind of training to you?
No, this was winter build-up to go back to Belgium.
Right. Getting
so
strong.
I could be a bit better in the races on the cobblestones, etc. And it was going well. And then I was talking to the people in Cycling Magazine. They said, hey, there's a job vacancy. Why don't you apply? I said, well, I'm going back to Belgium. I want to be a pro bike rider. They said, well, do it anyway. So I applied, and I didn't get the job. I did go down for the interview, but I didn't get the job. And then the guy who did left pretty soon after. I don't know why. And so the editor was Alan Gaffer. Became a personal friend in the years to follow. And Alan he was very rough, a great guy, but very strict. And he was the editor of the magazine. He was a great editor of the magazine. And he rang me up on a Friday lunchtime at my work, which you're not allowed to do because the supervisor said, Phil, this is a personal call. You can't have these. I said, no, I'm sorry. I don't know how they got the number. And so I said, hello. He said, Gafe here, Phil. He said, the guys left the job. If you're here, it was Friday lunchtime. If you're here 8 o'clock at your desk in Fleet Street on Monday, you've got the job. I said, what? He said, that's all. He said, if you're not here, I'll take it. You don't want it. And that's how Gaffer was. So I hung up, I went home, I left the job because it was only temporary anyway. Said to my mum, I said, Mum, I'm going to live in London, I think, to be a journalist. Oh, and of course the Northerners hate the London. What are you going there for?
Yeah.
I said, well, I won't be there for long, I'm sure. I said, but I'll go and give it a shot. And so I drove, because in those days, there was no freeways all the way. I drove overnight to London. It was only 300 kilometres. I slept in the car. And I was at my desk at 8 o'clock in Fleet Street.
Wow.
And nowhere to stay, just my suitcase in the car. And the Gaffer said, where are you staying? I said, I don't know. He said, you can stay at my house. And the guy took me to his home, and I stayed with him for 6 weeks. But the first thing during that week, first thing I did, I remember I had my cards printed, Phil Liggett, journalist, and Gaffer collapsed with laughter. Said, you a journalist? And he had a big laugh, did Gaffer. But we got on so well. But he called me over one morning and said, look, you realise you can't race anymore with the job. I said, no. And of course, inside me, I was saying, yeah, right, I'm racing.
Yeah.
And he turned a blind eye because I continued to race. And then he got letters from the fans and the readers saying how nice it is to see you've got a real cyclist on the staff that knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, right.
So he called me over and said, look, I know you're racing. He said, but it's good for the magazine. So he said, you've got to ride, these are the rules. He said, you enter only the biggest race of the weekend. And if you're late to be in the office on Sunday night, because we had to go to press overnight, Sunday till Monday, he said, I'll sack you. And he would. Friendly as we were, I wouldn't be good enough for the job as far as he's concerned. And he'd sack me. So for the next 2 years, I did race, and I raced at the highest level that I had to appease Gaffer. And then one day during that period, Gaffer said, I think we'll get some renewed interest in breaking road records because we have a brilliant place-to-place record situation in Britain, like Land's End, John O'Groats, London, Edinburgh, London, Portsmouth. Yeah. A very long-standing tradition. He said, get the records book off the shelf and see which one you can beat. I said, what? I said, these guys are full-time bloody riders. I said, I can't beat any of them. just get the book down, he says, and I'll give you 1 day a week off, and I'll pay your expenses for food on that day only. And so I climbed up on the shelves, blew the dust off the record books, and I looked at what one I might be able to get. And I looked at Wantage Winchester, Wantage. Start and finish, you name the point, but you've got to pass through those two cities because they have statues. I think it's a King Henry in each of the centres of the towns.
Yeah.
You turn at those statues. I set it all up, and I broke the record. I was 10 minutes up on the record with 5 miles to go, and I blew like you would never believe. I got the record by 1 minute and 40 seconds, and I'd booked the local pub. I finished outside a pub on a big straight road in a car park. I couldn't get off the floor of the car park. I was so tired. I was spewing everywhere. And all the officials who'd looked after the timing and done all the arranging, I'd paid for lunch for them. I never went in there. They went in, had a great lunch, came out, I was still in the car park. I was absolutely knackered. And then Gaffer made me write the 2 pages on record breaking.
Yeah.
The headline was, and I've still got the article in the magazine to this day, record breaking is easy. And so I was getting so low now. I was already going out with Trish, who's my wife now.
Yeah.
And she couldn't recognize me. I was looking after myself. I was racing. I had a sponsored team. I was riding for a sponsored team, Whitcomb Cycles from South London. I lived in the north. They wanted me to always race in the south. And I had good season. One year I had 15 second places, and I could never get across the line first. It was pissing me off. I did win occasionally, very rarely. And so I was going thinner and thinner and thinner until I rode the Tour of Ireland. I looked at myself in a picture. I thought, my God, if I go over that grating over there, I'll go down it if I turn sideways. I was so thin.
Really?
And so that was the beginning of the end for me. I had to sort of stop cycling. So I stayed with Cycling Magazine for a while. I was writing well, still no ambitions of any future thing. I remember I shared a flat with a Sun journalist who was also a Northerner, so we spoke the same language. He came from Manchester, and the diamond merchant who worked in Hatton Garden, which is the big diamond centre. And I remember the diamond merchant had no interest whatsoever in bike riding. And he said to me, Phil, why do you always go cycling and you'll never make any money, you'll never be rich? Well, I often wonder how much money he makes now, because I've had a heck of a good time for nearly 40 years, earning very, very well, and I live a great life. But I'm always amazed that I've made a penny out of what was my hobby, which was cycling.
Yeah.
And I remember the first check coming from the BBC for doing 30 seconds on the radio. They paid me £15. And I looked at the check, and I looked at Trish, my wife, and I said, hey, I don't believe this. Look at that, a check for 15 quid. And not just for talking about cycling.
Yeah.
But of course, cycling was in its infancy. I'd got involved in every facet of the sport because I left the magazine because I was offered the chance to be race director of the Milk Race Tour of Britain. And that I said to the guy who was offering it, because he was leaving after 7 years to drive around the world, actually. And he said, he'd assessed me for a long time, shrewd observer, and one day he just asked me out for lunch and popped the question. I said, I don't know. He said, well, look, it's only a 3-day-a-week job, but you can always freelance and continue. And I looked through it all, and that's what I did. I took the job, and I freelanced as well. I worked for national papers like The Guardian, and the Daily Telegraph followed after that. And so I just said, okay, I went to the office, and I left the Cycling Weekly, which had shaped my whole life, and it was a very sad farewell. And I was getting married. The same time I was starting the job. I hadn't got the job when I was getting married. I was going for the interview. It was March the 20th. It was the day we got married, 1971. The interview was 4 days later. So I had a very short honeymoon, and I had my bike with me because I was still racing. And when I came back for the interview, the phone rang as I was about to walk out the door, and it was Bill Squance, who was the race controller and worked for the Milk Marketing Board. He said, where were you yesterday? I said, what do you mean yesterday? I've got my suit on. I'm leaving the house as we speak. I'm coming for the interview. He says, it was yesterday. I said, Bill, I'm sorry. I said, I was on my honeymoon. I know, he said. Look, the chairman was here. Everybody was here to meet you. But look, we're not having another one. He says, you've got the job. I said, wow, I breathed a sigh of relief. I mean, I was leaving the magazine to go to a job I didn't have a minute ago.
Yeah.
And so I got the job. So during that period of I did the milk race for 22 years. During that period of time, I became an international commissaire with the top marks and the highest level. And so I got to the World Championships as a referee, chief commissaire, and things. But I was doing everything because there was nobody else.
Right.
And I was becoming, quite innocently, a pioneer.
Mm.
And I was enjoying every minute of it. My hobby had turned into my life. And so, yeah, then the tragedy came when in 1973, my first Tour de France, in 1972, which was, funnily enough, my first milk race, the guy who was commentating on the milk race, David Saunders, came up to me and said, would I like to go on the Tour de France in 73? I said, yeah, not half. I'd never been to the Tour, I only saw it in picture books. And he said, well, I can't pay you any fee, but I can pay your expenses because we're going to really expand the coverage on ITV. And he was their commentator. And so he was only getting 20 minutes a week during the season, but it was expanding slightly.
Yeah, the start of it all.
It was the start of it all. So I said, David, I'd love to. I don't care about the money. I'm with you. And we became great friends.
And you were co-commentators?
No, I just offered my services to a few newspapers and freelance. So I made a few bob. Yeah. He paid my expenses, and he did all the TV commentary. I just was the driver.
Right.
And I drove his car, made sure he was at the TV compound on time, picked him up, got him to his hotels, and drove on the tour during the day. And that was the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done in my life. Dicing with cars that bang you up the boot to keep you on the move at the right speed. And so I just said, okay, David, I sat with him at the commentary position because it was a nice seat and a good view of the race. But I was absolutely not connected to the television. I met the people through just being friendly with David.
Yeah.
Anyway, that went on from 73 until I was on Paris-Nice with him in 1978, which we covered together. And we both reported there was no TV on Paris-Nice in England. So we both just followed the race and did our stories for our respective newspapers and we had a great time. During that time, he got a phone call to say, would he go back to England and do Superstars, a big breakthrough, top TV rated show. And it was on the Saturday before Paris-Nice ended on the Sunday. He so much wanted to do this because he wanted to further his TV career.
Yeah.
And so I said, go, David, just go. He flew back. I kept the car. I finished Paris-Nice and ghosted his articles as well for the newspaper, as well as my own. And then I just said goodbye to him. It was to be a pretty tragic situation because he went home. I rang him up on the Monday morning and from home. Now, Paris-Nice ends at 6 o'clock at night down in Nice. There's an hour's time difference, so it's 5 in Britain. And I decided not to stay. I just jumped in the car and I drove. It's a 12-hour drive to Calais. Then you get on the boat and then you drive up from London. So I was home at 10 in the morning on the Monday morning. And I called David straight away because the car was owned by Honda, I think. And so it was their car and he wanted it back. Tuesday was the deadline. So I just said, David, I've got the car. Where are you? I said, I'm back home. He said, you bloody silly fool. He said, you could have killed yourself doing that, driving through the night. You might have fallen asleep. I said, I'm fine. No problems at all. So I'll just bring you the car back. Let's meet at King's Cross Station, where we did. He gave me a bottle of wine for covering for him, and he drove off. By the time I got home, there was a message on my answer phone from his wife saying, Phil, you better sit down. David is dead. And he'd hit a lamppost in the car, totally unexplained accident. A police car did the same thing at the same point 3 weeks later, and they all survived, and they couldn't understand why the car did what it did.
Wow.
So, but it's a mystery which was never solved, but the fact was David was dead.
How did that feel?
I was devastated.
Yeah.
I mean, because the phone started ringing straight away from all of David's work to say, would I write an obituary? The BBC rang, would I go on the air at 7:15? They had a big sports programme at 7:15. Would I go on and report the problem, the death of David? And I did. And then at 7 o'clock, I just sat on the bathtub upstairs and I just cried. And so the realisation had hit me that David had gone. And I just walked around next day in a bit of a circle and stuff. And then within 2 days, television telephoned me and said, look, Phil, we know your ability, but we never had money for 2 people. David would love you and think a lot of you and be proud if you took his job. I said, you put it like that? I said, because I would never apply. They said, we know that. They said, if you want it, come and see us. We're not having interviews if you want the job. And so that's how I got my job. And it's a long story that I've talked about when I got my first job. They said, you're learning the hard way. First job is in April. It's 45 minutes live on TV, which is the biggest show they'd ever done. And this would have made it for David.
Jeez.
And I got to do it. And I was also the organiser of the race. I brought over to Britain 88 professionals. Biggest field ever assembled outside of a world championship. I had Jerry Knateman there, who was the world champion. I had Bernard Thévenet, 2-time winner of the Tour de France. I brought a lot of people out. And it was a great race. And so I did my first comedy. I thought it wasn't very good. I remember saying, we've now got Jerry Knateman, the world champion, breaking wind at the front and stuff like that. And I was really feeling,
You were nervous?
Oh, I was nervous because I was still the organiser of the race as well. I had to put my finger out the window with a thumbs up, so they started in line with television joining us.
Yeah.
And this is all strange to me. I mean, I didn't know all the boxes and pressing buttons and looking at monitors.
And you were alone. Nobody to bounce
totally
off of.
alone. No co-commentator. It was just me.
Right.
And so I came down and thought, well, if that's TV, I don't know. And for 2 years, we only really got virtually no live on TV. We just did voiceovers of the classics and stuff.
Yeah.
But not like today where you can just click on the net and get the full start list. I had to wait and contact the organisers to fax me a start list after the race is finished, and they've thrown them all away. They don't give a monkey's. And so it was very difficult. I commentated mainly without notes, and I had to try and recognise riders. They were dirty as hell in Paris-Roubaix or things like that. And you've got 1 hour time slot to voice a 10-minute film. Otherwise, the satellite went down. It was all very difficult and very frustrating, and I found it very nerve-wracking.
How did you do your homework back then without internet, without and how did you keep that to use for commentating?
You really had to do it by calling friends because there was no Wikipedia. Not that that's always accurate, but there's no Wikipedia, there's no pro cycling stats, there's nothing.
Yeah.
It was strictly by reading all the books I correlated over the years. And there's a Belgian book called Velo, which I have kept every copy since 1967. And I relied heavily on checking all the past results and knowing the riders' reputations and stuff. No, there's a lot of work to be done, far more than there is now. And I got away with it. In effect, I felt I got away with it. The guys liked me on television. And that was the only advice I ever got. And it's the same advice I gave Paul Sherwen when we took him on. It was a guy called Dickie Davis, who was a top frontman for the World of Sport programme in England. And he called me minutes before I went on air at Alexandra Palace on that April. And he said, now all you've got to remember, old son, is why you got the job. I said, well, that's the problem, Dickie. I don't know why I got the job. And he laughed. He said, because they liked you. He said, don't change when the red light comes on. And that's the only advice. And I said the same to Sherwen. Because when I asked Sherwen to join me, it took a year before he actually was able to take the job and they were able to offer him the job. I said, just remember, Paul, don't change when you come on telly.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support.
Phil and I met because we're both from the same part of the UK. When I started racing, before I became a professional in 1977, Phil was the guest of honour at my cycling club dinner. Throughout my cycling career from 78 to 87, we got on very well, and talked, because, you know, as an English journalist, he only had to talk to me because there were no other English cyclists. So I was about to retire from European racing in 1985. In 1986, Channel 4 were going to do a big coverage, and Phil said, whatever you do, even if you race for a couple more years, just make sure that you're not going to race in July. I'd like to have you race talking alongside me about the race. And I thought that'd be great to be able to commentate with Phil Liggett for a year. That became 2, that became 3. It's now 27 years that we've actually commentated together.
How did you bump into Paul? How did you get acquainted with him and know he was...
When Paul was leaving for, I think it was 1977, when he was leaving to live in France, he'd been at university, he'd finished university, and he'd won all the big races in Britain. He was a member of the Altrincham Rotolac Club in near Manchester. And the club asked me to be the guest of honour at the dinner, and they were saying farewell to Paul, who was now going to try and make his way as a pro. And he went to the ACBB in Boulogne-Billancourt in Paris. And of course, he only raced there for 1 year as an amateur, won a lot of races, and he got a pro with Fiat in 1978, pro contract, and straight into the Tour de France, the same year that Bernard Hinault rode his first tour, and Sean Kelly. So that's how I met him, but I'd reported him racing in Britain for a long time, but never had any great conversation, but he was always friendly.
Yeah.
And then over the 10 years he was a pro in Europe, we became very friendly, because I was always seeing him at the Tour de France. He would always, in those days, there was nothing slick like the Tour is now. They just put a food truck in the street and the riders would go and grab a bit of fruit, and that was what they put in the back pockets for a day's racing. Wow. There was nothing else. And so I used to always get Paul to get me half a grapefruit, and I couldn't go, taboo if anybody went near that truck except a rider.
Yeah.
Paul would come back and give me my half a grapefruit, and he'd go, here's your half a grapefruit. I thought, oh, thanks, mate. Because I had something to eat then, you see. And over those 10 years, we become reasonably good friends. I never saw him outside the races, never saw him socially, but I knew all about him. And I knew how good he was as a talker and a rider. And when I read in the newspaper that Paul Sherwen was retiring from his European situation in 85, I think it was, but he was 86, but he was going to race for 2 more years for an unknown sponsor in Britain, and then he would stop. So I went to watch Paris-Nice that year of 86, I think. And I walked up to him and I said, are you retiring? It was the end of the half stage which came into Nice, because the afternoon is up the Col des time trial. And he goes, yeah, I am. I said, well, I'm coming back to the UK. I can't tell you who the sponsor is. And I'll do 2 seasons and then I'm out, finished. I said, okay. I said, look, maybe you want to think of working with me in the future, because the cycling's getting pretty popular on TV, and I don't know if I can offer you the job because I have to talk to the networks, but if I can, and if they're okay with it, what do you think? He said, well, I've got the contract with this sponsor for 2 years after that. I said, okay, well, look, we don't know what's going to happen, but when you sign this contract with whoever it is, put a clause in, you don't race in the month of July, which is the Tour de France. And he said, okay. So within weeks, I got a phone call from Rally Industries in Britain. They were the sponsors.
Yeah.
And I knew the guy, George Shaw. And George came and said, hello, Phil George. I said, hello, George, how are you, mate? He said, listen, I've got this strange situation. I said, what is it? He said, well, it's with Paul Sherwen. I said, don't tell me, he's riding for you. He said, well, yes, he is, but he's put this phrase in his contract, not to race in the month of July. I said, George, I'm thinking long term. If Paul joins me on TV, obviously it'll be straight to the Tour de France. That's it. Oh, I see, he said. I said, but George, look, he'll be able to wear a logo top on the television. They won't mind that, as long as it's a delicate logo of Rally. It was Banana Rally, or Rally Banana it was. He said, I'm good with it. He said, I just didn't understand it. And that's how he left it. Paul signed the contract, and he took time out in the 2 Julys that followed on the TV with me. And during those 2 years, he won the Criterium Championship for Britain, and he won the road race. He retired as the reigning road race champion. So it worked both ways for him.
Yeah.
And we got on like a house on fire. So that's how we came together. And we lasted 33 years, which is the longest running sports duo in any sport in the world.
Wow.
Which Paul always told me, because he's very proud of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And just over a year ago when he passed away,
Yeah.
how has it been in that just over a year without him by your side? And how's that felt? How has that been doing your job?
Well, to give you some idea, no one was expecting Paul to go.
No.
He always used to laugh at me because he'd always say, you're never ill, etc. And he said, you'll live forever. I said, Paul, I won't outlive you. And as it happened, I did. He went to bed and he didn't wake up. Maybe it was something I didn't know. The reason's not really known. And so I remember the call. I was living in my house in South Africa, which is a wild bush house in the middle of nowhere with Trish. And his wife rang me and she burst into tears. She says, Paul's passed away. I said, what? It's not possible. And then we talked about it. And then, of course, it was a big thing. We were planning what to do for Paul. And I looked at Trish and she looked at me and said, what time? I said, Paul's died. Well, I went to bed that night with a very heavy heart. And I just put a 2-line tweet out. By next morning and for the next 5 days, I think I had 30,000 tweets.
Wow.
And I sat at the computer for 5 days replying to them and talking to people, arranging things. Some of the most famous cycling people contact. I don't know where they found my email from because they really were Paul's friends, but they were writing to me in long letters, all required long responses. Yeah. I never left. I had no final week holiday, of course, at the house. I sat at the desk the whole week, getting more and more, I don't know, sad.
Yeah.
Anyway, the TV rang me, all the TV stations rang me, said, what the hell happened, what's going on? And all planning the future after Paul, of course, because they're professional people.
Yeah.
And so we had to talk about who would replace me, first of all, at the Tour Down Under. And the irony was the day he died, his visa just arrived to work in Australia for the Tour Down Under. I mean, rubbing salt into the wounds.
Yeah.
And so we went through it all. And it finished with Robbie McEwen did the Tour Down Under with me, a natural commentator, Robbie. And then Bob Roll, who we were already working with on the NBC coverage of the Tour de France, he got the leg up to sit by me in Paul's seat, and he came off the sort of expert panel. But we'd known Bobby for ages and ages. Paul actually liked Bobby, so it was a good decision. Paul would have approved of that. He never worked with Robbie, but Robbie was great too. So, in a strange way, I've actually enjoyed the whole of 2019 commentating with the new guys, but it wasn't working with Paul.
Yeah.
The one thing I was so happy I never did was call him Paul, whoever I was with. It was so easy because we were Phil and Paul.
Yeah.
And we were locked together. We didn't realise it, but we never ever went to dinner without each other. We just walked out the door at the same time. We walked for dinner. We ate together. We went to sleep together. For the first few years on the tour, we shared a room because we told stories all night. And then the hotel got too small, so we had to get separate rooms. But we just did everything together. And the people knew us as Phil and Paul or Paul and Phil. Didn't matter. To this day, they still call me Paul. And others call Paul Phil.
Right.
And because Paul used to come back into the comedy box saying, oh, well, they bloody call me Phil again. And I said, well, don't worry, Paul. They often call me Paul. But even here now, and here we are in 2020, somebody came up to me in Adelaide and said, look, I'm really sorry what happened last year with Phil. I said, no, I'm Phil. I'm still okay. But I said, don't worry, please, because they all do it. And Paul will be flattered. Yeah.
What's your best memory with him in terms of your professional life with commentating a race together?
Well, the thing was that the first thing that we were very proud of, we never jumped on each other.
Yeah.
We'd give each other free air. And we had a system for that. I squeezed his leg and he put his finger in the sky.
Really?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And if he had something to say, he wasn't going to jump over what I was saying till my sentence was finished. I'd let him straight in, and he would do the same for me. So it was a very tidy show. But we did the show to the best of our professional ability, but we did it in a happy-go-lucky way.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, every team we worked with, whatever the networks, and we've worked all over the world on the English-speaking networks. It's not just the Tour de France. The crew are part of the team. Now, so-called talent in some countries is exalted company. They're all licking your knees. You get the best room in the hotel. We never subscribe to that. We're one of the team, just like a pro bike race. Yeah. The guy who is a cameraman, the soundman, or even the person giving me coffee is every bit as important as I am. We all go together. And we were well revered for that. They liked us. We go out for dinner and laugh and joke with them while so-called upmarket talent would go back to the suite and have room service. And so we were very popular.
Yeah.
Evidenced by the fact on the Tour de California, the whole of the production team had T-shirts made with Paul's face on. And we had a group photo on the April following his death in the previous December. And it's we were close. We were popular. We liked to be popular, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We tell jokes non-stop. But when it came to the job, we liked to think we did a great job. And the producers, I remember CBS once saying when these little girls come up to me and say, Mr. Liggett, I have to know what your opening words will be when we go live. And I said, well, if you can find out, let me know. Because I haven't a clue. It'll probably be something like, hello. Oh, okay. And that's what we were like.
Wow. Big change from your first live show to now. Hey?
God, gee. Now I'm an old hand now. And old is the operative word. But nobody will let me retire. Paul kept saying when he was alive, you can't retire until I've got the kids through college. Because I used to sort of get a lot of jobs for Paul. And he said, the kids are in college, you can't retire. They're all being privately educated.
Yeah.
And from there, of course, I've just gone through life and enjoyed it. And now I've got people, NBC visited me 3 years ago in London and asked me when I was going to retire. And I said, this would be when Paul was around, of course. I said, you've got the contract on me. You tell me. And they said, no, we don't mean now. We mean later when the contract expires, which is another 3 years. I said, wow, do you know how old I'll be? I'll be about 75. And they said, well, we've never done it before, but we're prepared to give you a contract whereby you give us 1 year's notice. I said, that sounds like a contract for life. And in American TV, that's a huge offer because, they're taskmasters, to say the least, in American TV. So that's how it stands. And just recently I've been to the Channel 7 offices and I said, well, this will be my last games. And they said, oh, we're sorry to hear that. Are you sure? So they were actually saying, we still want you around in 4 years from now. I said, well, let's talk about it a bit later.
Yeah.
But that's so flattered to be in such a situation.
Yeah.
But here in Australia, I'm mobbed everywhere I walk. Same in America. I've sort of drifted away from the British because they changed the television system and therefore I had to step down. As they kept reminding me, you're not being sacked. We just can't get enough of you, so we'll have to use somebody else. That was the words.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. I'm still very good friends with all the TV networks around the world.
You've always been very proud at when you actually transcend the cycling enthusiast audience and you get to the person who has no interest in cycling, but they have an interest in what you're saying about the country of France or whatever. How do you balance that and also with the cycling enthusiast who wants the details and you might hear on social media that they want you to retire? How does that feel? How do you balance that?
Well, the thing is that cyclists don't need me. But when you've got 150 million views over the period of the Tour de France, hardly any of those are cyclists, I reckon 10%.
Yeah.
The rest are people trapped by the beautiful pictures. They start to build up images of the riders and it becomes a giant soap. And they're almost in tears when their rider drops out because of an accident or something. But they've got no idea about the gears the guys ride and they're not interested either.
Yeah.
So I leave that to the experts like Paul. I was there to make a television program to entertain. So that's how we started talking about the châteaux, which when the Tour de France heard the reaction, they now produce a book on the châteaux. And the same with the bird life and the wildlife, which I know a lot about because I'm a patron of bird life in South Africa, etc., around the world, Australia too. And I know the birds. And I remember another commentator sat next to me. I could see he was looking at this Griffin vulture And he said, well, that's a big bird. And that was his only comment. And the cameraman didn't come off it for what seemed like an eternity to him. But I explained how it was reintroduced into the Pyrenees and the reasons why, etc.
Yeah.
And the people are interested in that. And they tell me so. The guy who writes and just says, well, why don't you just stick to your tails and get off of there? I don't reply.
Yeah.
He's entitled to his opinion.
Yeah.
But it's not my opinion.
Yeah,
It doesn't hurt me. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. That's what Twitter's all about.
Mm. Your every word hinges on, like, you're in the public eye, and that's a daunting thing. And it sounds like you've gotten used to that. Have you ever said anything that you just, I can't believe I said that?
Yes, you do say things. When I talk at dinners, I don't expect them to be reported. I'm talking to friends most of the time. I don't know the people, but we're in a room and maybe 200 people.
Yeah.
And I like to entertain them. So you say things just for effect.
Yeah.
Very often. I talked about a gay commissaire on the Tour de France, and I said he was gay, but he's also a friend, by the way.
Yeah.
But boy, some lady who was quite clearly not a man and not a woman, she came up and ripped into me and told me it was the most homophobic thing she'd ever heard in her life. She was absolutely disgraced. She once admired me. Hey, I said, well, I'm sorry it's offended you, but, I know this guy. He's a friend, and he wouldn't have minded me saying that.
Yeah.
Because I think we're all too self-conscious about being politically correct. You have to be politically correct on television, but not in a private party.
What about a thing that comes to mind that must have been hard on you is in 2012 on South African radio when you came out and quite publicly defended Lance Armstrong, and not long later he came out on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Yeah.
What was that like? The backlash and
the backlash was really from the world body.
Right.
They went into me because I call them nefarious and curious people, and they ripped into me. The first thing was I was making that radio broadcast just into South Africa, and I knew the basic culture of South Africa because I lived there.
Yeah.
I had no idea we were catching up with the modern world now, and they retweet and put everything out of the program. I didn't know. I was never told it was being recorded for general circulation throughout the world.
Right.
So I got caught, and I was very annoyed. And I just said to the guys, right, well, first of all, I won't do any more comments for you because you never briefed me properly. But yeah, I got caught.
Yeah.
And it's like leaving an open mic when you've just finished your show. People get sacked for saying things like that.
Yeah.
I've no regrets on the words because the fact remains, up until that time, the world body had one ambition: to nail Lance Armstrong, along with a few journalists, because they believed he was taking drugs, but with no proof, just extreme circumstances. And so they were out to get him. And the reason that Lance Armstrong lost his 7 tours, and there's an X rather than promote the second place riders, is the Tour de France believes all the second place riders were probably drugged as well. But they went for Lance because Lance made himself extremely unpopular with all of the people at any level, be they judge agencies or journalists or newspapers. And he would sue them. He gave up talking about them. As soon as he read something, he said, okay, sue him. And he won every time because they didn't have the proof. I didn't have the proof either, and so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I'd also seen the other side of Lance, where he was doing a lot of work with cancer, and I was his MC. People can be very cruel. They said I was up the arse of Lance Armstrong. I was not.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. Yes, like everybody else, I was scared to death it was one day going to be true, but I wasn't going to back off seeing the good he was doing. When I introduced cancer survivors at level 4 of the disease, wanting to speak to him, and I put them together, Lance would take them aside and speak quietly to them and give them encouragement and belief. Because he beat it. He was a long way down the road.
Yeah.
2 sides to Lance. I was devastated when he confessed. I thought, you bastard. That was my immediate thought. You bastard. I've really been conned. That was the feeling I got. Lance and I, that was in 2011 when was the last time I spoke to Lance Armstrong until the July of 2019. Never spoke to him, had an email, and he must have seen things I'd said in the press defending him. He never once said, thanks for sticking up for me, and nothing, nil, no contact. So life goes on, but I've no regrets about what I said about Lance. The media, for some reason, believe they are judge and jury. I hate the media for that. And the British media, if they're not interested in a nice story, they just want to get into your heart and rip it out. And so, even though I was brought up a journalist and I did all the training, etc., people don't want to see nice stories on television. That's their attitude. The bushfires is a big example in Australia. The people in America, having seen the pictures, think the whole of this island is on fire.
Yeah.
And it's going to cost billions of lost dollars throughout this summer now because of what the media said. They act totally irresponsibly.
Yeah. Can't
blame the reporter because the editor says this story's not strong enough. Get something else into it. And basically, it's exaggerated, out of all sight. And it was the case with Lance too.
Yeah, yeah. Last question, because you have to go. Your job is arguably more cutthroat or staying at the top where you are than a professional cyclist. Like there's only a handful of people who can occupy your job. There's not that many to go around. Is it cutthroat? Is it difficult to keep where you are?
I guess it is, but I never thought about it because throughout my life, I've never asked for a job in television, not one. I started with ITV and they asked me because of David's death. Then CBS heard me on the Tour de France, said, would I work for them? I said, well, I can, but it depends on ITV. And so they borrowed my voice to CBS and I did special extra work for them. And then the networks changed, ESPN and Versus and OLN and all of them came, eventually settled with NBC, all continued my contracts throughout. And I have to say, paid me extremely well.
Yeah.
ITV, I worked for over 25 years and then they wanted more of me, couldn't do it. I worked for CBC, I worked for South African TV, Irish television, all asked me to work for them. So there was nobody else they could turn to. I guess that's the way it was. I had the profile and they wanted me. Nowadays, going back maybe 15 years, somebody came up to me and said, that guy over there said he's the next Phil Liggett. I said, well, good luck to him.
Yeah.
If you can do it. It's a lot more than just being able to chat.
Yeah.
Doing pretty well, though. But I have to say that now it doesn't worry me. In the 60s, when I was in my 60s, of course, I could feel it coming on.
Yeah.
Many people think commentating is pretty easy. I've had bike riders. I've been flying with bike riders and said, I'm going to have your job next year. I said, are you? Yeah. I said, I can do that. I said, okay, give it a go. Because when you put people alongside you and let them look at the monitor and say, okay, when that red light comes on, you're live. Go on, talk. They don't know what to do. No, they need help. But they know the sport, but they don't know the rest of it.
Yeah, yeah.
The technical side and how if the producer says give us 10 seconds, he doesn't want 11. He wants 10 or better, 9.5. And people can't talk to order.
Well, I remember what you telling at a dinner once how complicated it's gotten where, Paul would be beside you and they'd cut you to a South African feed. He'd be on UK
That's right.
feed. And sometimes you wouldn't know if you're coming or going.
No, that was right. And that's absolutely true because we did, everybody who spoke English, our pictures went to them. And that's why I became famous around the world.
Yeah.
And Australia would get our voices. And to this day, they had over 1 million complaints. Britain had 1 million complaints when they took us off. Not because they don't like the new commentators, but because they fell in love with the old ones. And they liked our style.
Yeah.
And they stopped me to this day. But what the end product was, the reason that happened was what we used to do. Because NBC had inherited us working for the world, they didn't try to change it. That was the deal in the contract.
Right.
So NBC want me primarily, and Paul stayed on the world all the time. So when we had to what we call split away from the world to NBC only, so I could call a promo ad or something that only like going to a break that they would want to hear in the States, we devised a system of 2 lights, NBC World. When they're both red, terrific, talking to everyone. And then the producer would say, pause in 10 seconds. We pause for about 5 seconds and carry on again as normal, except Paul is now talking to the world. I've been cut away. I'm talking to the NBC viewers. And there's a polished styrene board gone between the two of us. We employed a guy just to drop the board down to keep it soundproofed. You would sometimes hear Paul talking in the distance, and people used to query that. And that's what we did, and it got very complicated. Sometimes Paul would slip a note across to me and say, "Who the fuck are we talking to?" And I slip a note back and say, "No fucking idea." And that became a joke with us because it gets, after 4 hours, the lights are flashing like Belisha beacons. And so, but it worked. Now, the Tour de France wanted to increase the coverage and give their viewers around the world slightly different pictures sometimes, like throwing in an interview to the world, which we wouldn't see on our monitors. So that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So after a couple of years of trying to get around the problem, they decided they'd have to say farewell to us. And that's how we no longer work for the world. We still work for NBC, or I still work with NBC, with Bob Roll. But the organisation Skyped us in a March day, got Paul in Kampala and me in London. They were in Paris. And after a lot of small talk, they said, "Well, Phil, we have to say that we have to split up our company now." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, you realise you'll be heavily criticised around the world." "Oh, yes, but it will last maybe 24 hours. Yeah, well, so far it's lasted 3 years, and they still complain.
I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, hit me up on our members Discord channel, where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.